Hi, and welcome to the Orca. BC, the Lower Mainland in particular, has a rental housing shortage. With less than a 1% rental vacancy in Metro Vancouver and other urban areas across the province, something has to be done. Well, in the 2017 election campaign, the NDP government made some big promises around increasing rental housing, and now the NDP is considering a New York City-style rent control, a move the Urban Development Institute says would put up to 13,000 new rental units at risk. Anne McMullin is the president and the CEO of the Urban Development Institute, and she's speaking out about the dangers the government has of pushing private rental developers out of the market. And Anne joins us here in the studio. Welcome.
Thank you very much. Pleasure to be here.
13,000 new units at risk. Just how? I mean, when you look at it, all levels of government, metro, provincial, federal, all say we need more rental housing. But now with regulations, you say those units could be at risk. Why?
Absolutely. Well, we did a survey a couple of weeks ago of the top 30 rental builders in the province, of which are UDI members as well, and said, how many rental units have you got on the books, on plans, and how many are going to go ahead, and if certain measures were brought in through the BC government's new task force, some of the things that have been hinted at, what would that mean? And they all said that if there's a kind of vacancy control that is being sort of floated, or that idea that's being floated, those projects not at risk, those projects are currently on hold. So do those builders of rental homes are sitting on the sidelines right now waiting to see what kind of measures the provincial government brings in. And if they are the kind of vacancy control that have been hinted at, that money will not be spent in British Columbia. Those homes will not be built.
Explain for our viewers what sort of rental controls they want to put on.
Right. Well, already the provincial government has come up with a number of rent controls. One of them is you're able to raise the rent on an annual basis by the cost of basically the cost of living, CPI, plus 2%, and that extra 2% is to be spent on the building itself. The tenant moves out, you need to perhaps get in a new appliance, certainly clean the carpets, replace the drapery, let alone major renovations, new boilers, fixing the elevator, and that also can offset increases property taxes, which we know go up every year, insurance costs, and other things. So that allowable increase has already been taken away. So all that the owners of rental units can do is increase the rent by the cost of living, which does not cover the cost of repairs and keeping the building in good shape, which people demand. In addition, they're talking about what they call a vacancy control, where you tie the rent to the unit rather than the tenant. So that unit will always have a certain level of rent. So let's say it's $1,200 today. You can only increase that rent, 2% every year, no matter who moves in and who moves out, no matter what happens in the market. So again, that limits the ability of the building owner to do any major repairs, to even make enough money to cover the costs. So if you go to a lender, say I want to build a 10-story rental building, but this is how much rent I can charge, and this is the only amount that I can charge, the lender's going to say, well, you're not going to make money, you're going to lose money. So you're not going to get the money, you're not going to be able to borrow the money to build it, and why would a developer build a building if they know they're going to lose money?
Generally, you look at rent controls, and most of us assume they're put in place to protect the tenants. But you say they can also hurt the tenants. How can they hurt tenants?
Well, what it does is it two things. One, it doesn't get built. So, we say we're not asking for sympathy for the development community. We're sort of saying, we're sympathy for all those who cannot find a place to rent, a place to call home. The second thing is, if the developer cannot, or the owner of the building cannot even pay for the upkeep, then the building starts to deteriorate, and that isn't good for the tenant. Whether you need it needs a new, modern, updated fridge, it needs clean carpets, it needs clean drapery. We talk about a 4-story building that has a elevator. If you can't afford to fix the elevator, it becomes a walk-up. So, the buildings will start to deteriorate if there isn't the money there to be able to fix it. It's just like anything. If you can't afford to fix your own home, if not enough money comes in for what's going out, then your own home begins to deteriorate. There's upkeep. And And if you put in so many controls that doesn't allow the owner of the building to have enough money to do that, and so they start to lose money, the building deteriorates, or like I said, it just simply doesn't get built.
Some economists will actually say, though, right now government policy is good for the moment, but not in the long run, because everybody gets hurt. Would you agree with that?
Absolutely. I'm not sure in what context you mean that, but I suppose there's some policies that work. It might work for today, but in the long term, when we keep adding on more costs, more regulations, eventually that starts to catch up and it starts to impact the economy in a negative way. And that's just a general economic, truth. Whatever industry it is, when you start to, we forget. We think, well, it is about homes, it is about where we live, but it is a construction industry. There are engineers and builders and architects who are all part of the building of homes and the building of houses. So, it is, quote, I guess you could argue, it is an industry. And there's some people that claim, well, you shouldn't be making money off of homes, but people have to be paid to work. And, and again, and when you put on too many regulations, too many taxes, when we look at the housing industry, what is about 25% of our overall economy in British Columbia, 250,000 jobs that people rely on, communities, whether, and also in secondary jobs. So you start to affect that. It affects all of us, let alone just the inability to have a home.
And given the fact that it's so important to the economy, and we've heard from other economists that the net increase of people moving into the city of Vancouver every year is anywhere from 25 to 40,000 people. They need to be accommodated somehow. Why then do cities, municipalities, and provinces put so many regulations and so many hurdles in front of developers that makes it almost, not impossible, but very difficult to build?
That's a very good question. Some regulations, you could argue, are, they're with good intent. We want to have green buildings. We want to have energy efficient buildings. We want to have buildings that, when we talk about urban design, that look good, that are comfortable, that preserve heritage.
We all agree with that. But nonetheless, it still takes 4 to 5 years just to get a permit.
So when we start to what we call pile on all these new policies, municipalities need to look very carefully at what that is doing to adding time and cost. And are there ways then to create incentives or take away other policies that are no longer necessary? If we're sort of creating a more sustainable environment where we need less cars, people are living closer to transit, yet municipalities still have the same parking requirements. Well, a parking space can add costs of anywhere from $20,000 to $30,000 per unit. So when you're adding policies to, like I said, to make things more green or more sustainable, then we need to look at things where we can remove costs or creating more incentives. Let's look at when we're building rental. How about, you're adding PST, you're adding GST. Can we relax some of those other costs so that rental buildings, for instance, can be built? But we have to look at ways to create incentives and take away overlapping policies. What we also see in municipalities, when you talk about why it takes so long, for example, in the city of Vancouver, there might be 25 steps that you've got to go through before you get an approval. Well, you might get to step 20 and all of a sudden you're in contravention of step 1. For instance, you're building adaptable home, which is good. So, a home that can be adapted for people in wheelchairs or other
correct.
Yet you comply with the adaptable policy, but now you're in contravention of urban design. They might say, well, we want more 3 bedrooms, but you need to make it smaller because of the cost, yet you're not allowed to have what we call a borrowed light bedroom. Every bedroom's got to be on the outside. So there's policies that are with good intention. Sometimes they're actually impossible to achieve. And like I said, then there's this overlap, there's no hierarchy, and then that takes time as you have to go through the system.
What are you hearing from your members? What does the future look like then?
Well, it's very, very difficult right now. It is very, very difficult to build homes. And I've heard from some developers just saying, you know what, I just don't know if I can do this anymore here. It's just getting so difficult. We have, we just had a municipal election where 50% of the councillors are brand new. And that takes time to be, getting councillors up to speed. We have a government in Victoria that has been very, very focused on what we call demand side measures, about bringing in more taxes and more regulation and making things more and more difficult, all with the intention of trying to create more affordable housing. But we all know you cannot tax your way out of a problem. You cannot tax your way to affordability. You can't add more costs and then say that that's going to somehow help bring down the price of homes. It's being very difficult. We've seen some developers are looking in other areas, whether it's in Austin or Atlanta, Seattle. In Seattle, for instance, we've got developers down there. They were able to build 12,000 rental units just over a 2 or 3 year period, because it only takes a year to get approvals and 2 years to get things built. So it's tough. We've seen certainly prices are softening, certainly at the very high end, and probably even at the condo side too. But that's majority of that has to do with the federal government's mortgage stress test. So what that means is really that first-time buyers have not been able to get into the market. But then I talk to others, and there's an optimism that that we will continue on, that we will continue to build homes. There are, and you sort of said a number, about 25 to 40,000. The estimates now are about 47,000 people moving here every year, with another 120,000 temporary foreign workers and international students come to this region. So homes will continue to be being built, but are the prices necessarily going to come off? Not a huge amount. And is it going to, because it just seems to be getting harder and harder to do business.
Anne McMullin, thank you so much for your time.
All right, hope that wasn't too much of a downer, but yes, you're very welcome.